Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. I would now like to turn the call over to Mr. George Martin. Sir, you may begin.
Thank you, Katrina. Hi, everyone. My name is George Martin. I work for TDA. We are a HUD technical assistance provider, and I'm happy to welcome everyone to today's Housing and Employment Works webinar, Building System Capacity to Employ People Experiencing Homelessness. I am on the call today to provide technical support. So I'm going to introduce today's hosts and presenters in just a minute, but before that, I'm going to go over some technical instructions. I want to start by reminding everyone to clear away distractions such as cell phones, other programs on your computer, and give your undivided attention to the presentation today. Today's presentation will last approximately 90 minutes, and this session is being recorded, and the recording will be placed online at a later date. If you have technical problems with today's webinar or conference call, you can send a chat or a Q&A in the right-hand side of your screen. You should see those panels up, and you can send those in, and we will try to resolve your issue as quickly as possible. Everyone on the phone has been muted for today's call, but we're hoping that we should have the opportunity to answer some questions over the phone at the end of the call, and also you'll be able to ask questions throughout the session using the Q&A tool in the WebEx webinar software. So right now I'm going to go over both those ways that you'll be able to ask questions. Throughout today's session, you'll be able to ask questions using the Q&A tool on the webinar software. If you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a number of panels, and one of them says Q&A. You can simply type a question into the field and make sure that you are sending the question to all panelists, and then click Send. The panelists will get your question, and we will answer it as quickly as possible. At the end of today's session, time permitting, we will allow some folks to ask questions over the phone. When our operator, Katrina, who began the call, when she indicates that it's time to start a queue for questions over the phone, you can get in that queue by pressing *1 on your telephone keypad. When your turn comes in the queue, Katrina will introduce you, and you'll be able to ask your question over the phone to everyone who's joined the meeting today. If you decide that you no longer want to ask a question after you've joined the queue, you can press *2 to be removed from the queue. Written questions will be answered in writing throughout through the Q&A tool throughout today's session. As I said before, time permitting, panelists may answer some questions verbally at the end of the meeting. Please keep in mind that we may not be able to answer all questions, and we will try to answer the most common questions first. If we're not able to answer your question today, you can follow up by emailing krio@ahpnet.com. And with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to Kevin Kissinger from HUD. Kevin?
George, can you introduce Brent?
Sure. I'm sorry about that. I'd like to introduce Brent Parton from the U.S. Department of Labor. Brent?
Oh, thank you. Greetings, everyone. We appreciate you being on this webinar, and I just want to thank our colleagues at HUD for working with us to pull this together. My name is Brent Parton. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor here in the Employment and Training Administration, and it's exciting to see these types of cross-agency, cross-sector discussions going on, and we're really happy to be a part of it. I'm going to speak at a very high level about some of the principles around the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act and how that relates to building system capacity to employ people experiencing homelessness. At the end of the day, this work happens at the local level, and I know that people out there have a lot more experience and see things on the ground and how this plays out, and we've got some great examples of how those partnerships can come together, and I'm going to let them speak to that. But just kind of mention here at the get-go that WIOA really does the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, otherwise known as WIOA, which is probably what I'll be saying the rest of the time here, really does present an opportunity to place a new focus on populations that experience barriers to employment. And of course, that includes people who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. I'll just say from the get-go, like the predecessor of WIOA, the Workforce Investment Act WIOA does specifically recognize that people experiencing homelessness, serve under the definition of people who face barriers to employment. People, of course, facing homelessness are not a homogeneous population, and they can encounter a number of individual circumstances to employment in terms of their access to employment. And I think it's important to note that, when you experience multiple barriers or different types of barriers, at the core of addressing that is the idea of partnership. And partnership is really a key principle within the vision of WIOA. That's really what it's about when we talk about WIOA's ask to states, as well as local areas through the planning process, to join us in terms of breaking down barriers across different programs to provide numerous types of supports that individuals might face, things from the lack of transportation, child care, getting basic education and adult education skills, as well as specific types of training that people might need to connect with the labor market. Partnership is something that we really want to underscore here at the Department of Labor and our partner agencies at the Department of Education and Department of Health and Human Services, who have been working on this journey with us through the implementation of WIOA. And so we're really excited to see now a lot of this coming to fruition in the form of state plans, and really something that is going to create what we believe are a reduction in the administrative costs and streamlining requirements and breaking down silos that will cascade down into the state as well as the local level in the area where you do your work. So it presents an exciting opportunity for local workforce boards to really think about integration of service delivery, particularly for those in most need, and that includes people who face barriers to employment, and of course homeless individuals fall into that category. We're seeing a lot of exciting new partnerships come together through the state planning process. That includes TANF, of course, people who are engaged in receiving public assistance, and WIOA really does create a new emphasis on this idea of priority of service to these individuals. Naturally, it creates some incentives to serve the hardest to serve through the approaches of reporting on performance metrics. And we're really excited to see how so many different agencies are building bridges to create supportive structures that can provide them different types of services that individuals will need. We hope that everyone on this call will be working closely with their state and local officials to ensure the implementation of that priority of service to these individuals. Outside of the planning and the priority of service piece, another part that we'd like to highlight that WIOA presents an opportunity for individuals working with individuals who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless is the new provisions related to youth. As you saw from the law, the WIOA really orients the workforce system in a new way towards serving or emphasizing the service to youth that are out of school, individuals that are disconnected from the labor market, as well as the education system. These, in many of our communities, are really the most at-risk people out there, and WIOA seeks to emphasize services to those individuals and expand the age band of individuals that fall into that category of out-of-school youth, expands it to ages 16 to 24 to ensure that we can serve that population broadly and try to give them the supports they need to get them onto a track to success early in their life and hopefully create a sustainable path forward. Another area that I would like to cite that is something that, in terms of emphasis of WIOA that's pertinent to this discussion, is the focus on earn and learn. Earn and learn strategies that allow individuals to both acquire skills while earning an income are especially important for individuals who are homeless or facing low-income situations. WIOA places new emphasis and creates new incentives on the importance of integrating programs like apprenticeship and on-the-job training into the programming that we do and that we deliver in our communities. And that is something to think about that is so important in terms of, how do you provide someone with the training and skills they need to connect with a future, but at the same time allow them to earn the supports that they need to keep their loved ones around them going, but at the same time move them towards a more sustainable housing situation. Last but not least is the importance in terms of how we think about our strategies and executing in our communities through WIOA implementation. It's really important, again, to underscore the concept of partnerships, and WIOA emphasizes sector partnerships as one of the key things that workforce boards are engaging at a strategic level. When we think about serving the multitude of individuals in our communities, it's important to think broadly about who can be at the table, particularly when you're talking to industry about sort of building a talent pipeline, really thinking about the tremendous amount of assets that are in our communities, people that can be engaged with the system and then be connected with the labor market and think broadly about talent opportunities. Secretary here at the Department of Labor likes to say there is no spare American in this economy, and that's something that we know that people have taken to heart, and there's great examples across this country of that, and so we should be thinking about that in terms of how we're thinking to build the talent pipelines for the growth industries as well as the high demand industries in our communities. Last but not least, WIOA emphasizes the concept of career pathways, and that's such an important piece when we think about low-income and homeless populations as well. It's not just showing someone that they have a path forward, and it's not just getting them that one job, but trying to show them that there is opportunities to move up. And more importantly, the idea of linking education experiences should be coupled with linking the supportive services that individuals need. And for individuals that face high barriers, like homeless individuals, that's something to think about as well. And we really hope the WIOA provides the policy framework and the guidance that makes those partnerships easier to come together. So all in all, that's a kind of quick and dirty, but high-level view of sort of what we see as the principles of WIOA that pertain to this conversation, and most importantly, the important work that we're doing with this population. So again, I want to thank everybody for giving us a few minutes to talk about that, and really looking forward to hearing more of the rest of the conversation. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Pat Tucker, and thank you everyone for letting us join.
Hi, everybody. This is Pat Tucker. I am the moderator for this session, and just to give you a little bit of background about me, I've worked in the housing industry for over, 20-some years, and because I was working in housing, I saw that there was a need to have employment at the table. The employment really helped our buildings that we had people living in who came from all sorts of backgrounds. Mostly what they all had in common was that they had at some point been homeless. Employment helped them to actually get on their feet, more so than, along with the housing. The employment made a big difference in people's lives, and actually we had people who moved on and the housing went to somebody else who was in need. So I think if you do housing, you have to do employment. So that's a little bit about my background and where I come from. We're going to move forward. And for some reason, my computer just froze. I may need somebody to move the slides for me because my computer froze.
This is George, Pat. I just moved them ahead for you, so we're on slide 11.
Oh, okay. So, all right. Thank you. So I was going to start by doing an overview of, what the objectives of this session is going to be, and I'm not going to read off all of them, but we're trying to get you very familiar with WIOA, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We also want to help you to develop collaborations between the continuum of care and the workforce boards. We want you to be able to identify advantages of system partnerships and be aware of what's out there as far as training and TA materials are concerned. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do a brief overview of some of the services that are a part of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, or some people also say WIOA. So I'm going to do a brief overview of the services, and then we're going to keep moving. So let's go to the next slide, please. So the one thing that you get from WIOA is to improve the American Job Center system. And one of the things that is done is to make sure that the workforce and the people that are looking for work or looking for training and the employers who are looking for workers, need qualified workers, they can easily find the American Job Center. So that was one thing. If everybody's going to the same place, there could be this matching that's happening, where we can also determine what people's skill sets are and what employers are looking for, and making sure that there's a good fit. The states and the local areas are also encouraged to improve the customer service and program management by integrating the intake and the case management and reporting system. So making sure everybody's talking to each other. That's very key. Next slide, please. So the WIOA provides access to high quality training. The training has to lead to some industry recognized post-secondary credentials. That's going to be emphasized. So making sure that people are being put in the training programs that they can actually get to a job, and not just, training in basket weaving and the likes. Making sure that the state and the local areas are using career pathways to provide the education and employment and training assistance. So looking at a path to, higher paying jobs instead of just a dead-end job, looking at career paths. The local areas also have additional vehicles to get training and increase customer choice and quality. So making sure, one of the things we know is that if people get a job that they like, they're more likely to go to the job and stay at the job. So, trying to make sure that people have choice and it's a quality job, that, there's a good connection there. Next slide, please. The other thing that one of the other services is to promote the work-based training. So the idea is to use the industry and the sector partnerships to address the workforce needs of multiple employers within an industry. So looking at industry and deciding, what areas need help and where can we use that training to help those areas. Also giving employers incentives to meet the workforce need and offer opportunities for workers who want to learn and want to get on the job training. So employers are giving incentives to do that so that they can work with people. Next slide, please. The WIOA enhances the workforce services for the unemployed and other job seekers. Some of the ways that is done is by looking at categories of core and intensive services and collapsing those into career services, and not having requirements in the sequence of the services, but basically enabling those job seekers to access training immediately. You got somebody who's looking for work, and they want training and they're ready to go. You don't want to have them sit back and wait or make them jump through 20 hoops to get to the training. The local areas also have the flexibility to serve job seekers with the greatest need by transferring up to 100% of the funds between the adult and dislocated work programs. So basically, people with the most need can get the services quicker. So it's really looking at the hard-to-serve people and trying to get them into the system as quickly as possible. The job seekers who have basic skill deficits and those who are low-income individuals will have priority for the adult program. Unemployment insurance claimants can receive eligibility assessments and referrals to any array of training and educational resources. So trying to help people get back into the workforce as soon as possible is important. Next slide, please. Another service that is provided is trying to help people with disabilities have access to higher quality workforce services and get them ready for competitive integrated employment. the one thing you want to do is to make sure that the American Job Center is providing physical and programmatic accessibility to employment and training services for people with disabilities. Youth with disabilities can also receive extensive pre-employment transition services so that they can successfully obtain competitive integrated employment as well. And also the state voc rehab agencies will set aside at least 15% of their funding to provide transitional services to youth with disabilities. So youth with disabilities is another priority area for WIOA. Next slide, please. The last point that I wanted to make about the services is that WIOA will make key investments in serving the disconnected youth and other vulnerable populations. So making sure that the local areas increase the funds used to serve out-of-school youth, that's important. Also having the money being spent on getting young people work experience, and having activities such as summer jobs, the pre-apprenticeship programs, the on-the-job training and internships. Youth Build is another way of getting the young people some type of pre-employment work skills. And so there's a lot of different programs and services that are being offered. There are also services for farm workers, seasonal farm workers, Native Americans, and migrants. So there are a lot of services that are being provided through WIOA. And one of the things that we agreed to do on these webinars was to, every time we have a webinar, was to give you more information about WIOA. So you really are keyed into what the services are that are out there. I'm going to stop talking because we got a lot to get through. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of some of the services. And I'm going to pass this over to Mike Temple, who's going to be talking to you, and then we'll keep going. Mike?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and welcome to everybody. I am Mike Temple. I'm the director for the Gulf Coast Workforce Board and Workforce Solutions. We're the regional workforce board in a 13-county area of southeast Texas that includes the city of Houston. We have about 120,000 businesses and 6.5 million people, and lately we have about 15 inches more of rain than we really want to have. Our regional workforce system touches more than 26,000 employers and 350,000 people every year. And as we like to say, we help employers meet their human resource needs and individuals build careers. Workforce boards in Texas are a little unique and in that under state legislation that was actually passed back in 1995, Texas workforce boards have almost all of the workforce dollars that are available through almost every federal source. So we not only have all of the WIOA funds, we have Wagner-Pizer funds, we have child care and development block grant dollars, we have dollars from temporary assistance for needy families, supplemental nutrition assistance, the adult basic education and literacy funds, and coming soon will be the voc rehabilitation money and services. So we're quite a big bunch when it comes to putting everything together here. The relationship between the workforce system here in this region and the homeless services system is not something that just one day went from being one way to being another way. For many years, the Workforce Board had a contract with a local homeless service provider, funding essentially a career office location inside the homeless service provider. After that relationship ended, several of our local offices, we have 24, had relationships here and there with different homeless service providers depending on a particular need. But about 2 years ago, the Coalition for the Homeless in Houston and Harris County approached us here at the Workforce Board and said, we would really like to have you all join the continuum of care and see how we can work together better so that we use the strengths of each of our systems. It's not about the homeless service provider system offering employment services, and it's not about the workforce system trying to offer services to individuals experiencing homelessness. It's about each of us doing what we do best together. So we did join the continuum of care and are still an active member of that. And in addition, we started working together, the coalition, several of the service providers, and the workforce system in a project we call Income Now. And basically Income Now is the two of us learning to dance together or get married so that we knit together or braid together the services that we offer in a way that it immediately benefits the individuals experiencing homelessness. Where we've started with this is workforce staff in homeless coordinated intake points and homeless service provider staff in workforce offices. The Income Now project started off with an emphasis on rapid rehousing so that we were working with individuals who were appropriate for kind of an immediate help. We've got, in addition to the staff locating in each other's physical locations, we've got navigators who are going to be walking between each of our systems, between the workforce system and between the homeless service provider system, to help us understand each other and also to work out any kinks so that when we've got a customer who needs something, we can get that customer to where he or she needs to be so he can get what he needs when he needs it. The future for us in the Income Now project includes building supported employment efforts and focusing on other employment strategies for the individuals in permanently supported housing or individuals who may be require a higher level of service to go to work or to go back to work. Our relationship, we think, strengthens the both of us because we are doing, each of us, what we're best at. Together, we're going to do really well, and we're not trying to do each other's jobs. The workforce system in particular benefits from an increased integration with our community, access to an additional source of talent and workers, and of course, better understanding of the wants and the needs of our customers who may be individuals experiencing homelessness. It always helps when you're working together because each of you can help the other with any kind of wraparound service that one of you may not have. And so from our point, we see this relationship with the homeless service provider system being very beneficial when we need to get a wraparound service over there. My contact information is there on the screen if you are interested, and we always invite y'all to give us a call, send us an email, and if you're in Houston, please drop by. If you're coming soon, you might want to bring your canoe. And I am going to hand off the presentation now to Patrick Gearing and Jennifer Chang.
Hello. Thanks, Mike. So this is the Portland team. I'm Patrick Gearing, and I'm joined with Jennifer Chang. I'm from the Workforce Board called Work Systems here, and Jennifer's from Portland Housing Bureau. So we're going to go through the agenda here. I'll talk a little bit about the workforce side of things and how the relationship evolved, and Jennifer will talk from the standpoint of the continuum of care, and also about the governance in the background of it. I'll be focused more on how the relationship came together. It was really interesting to hear Mike, and Mike, hi, I think we presented together in DC a few months ago, and what you're doing there is remarkably similar to what we're doing here in Portland. I think it positions us really well for these kind of partnerships. You know, I'd say the same thing that Mike said in terms of the development of these relationships, that it's iterative process. It's not something that, you know, there's one kind of program or practice that's going to get you there. It's something, for us, it's taken 8 or 9 years to get to the place where we're at. So I thought because of that sort of relationship building and program infrastructure building and so forth, it's good to give the background and context. About 8 years ago in 2008, in our local workforce system, we implemented something called integrated service delivery. And I think the values behind integrated service delivery really were ahead of the time of WIA. This is during the WIA period. And, you know, to the points that Pat brought up about the changes under WIOA, we were starting to focus on priority populations in the integrated service delivery model. We had pulled back as much as we could from the notion of sequence of services. So, you know, Pat mentioned that there were lots of hoops that people would need to get into, for example, before going into training. And that had the effect of making it harder to partner and creating a service environment where, you know, it may not have been the intent of the one-stop system, but just when we tried to engage with partners, it was more difficult because there was bureaucracy and process in the way in terms of what's called core intensive and training, these different phases of that you'd have to go through before getting into training services. And we also started working on agency-to-agency level partnerships, and that's a really core strain within WIOA, is the expectation that the funding streams and programs work together. We were starting this effort in a more serious way in 2008. For us, that was called integrated service delivery, and it was really starting with two key DOL programs, and that's Workforce Investment Act, it was WIA back then, and then what's called Wagner-Pizer, which is really the state employment agencies. And what we did is we co-located and integrated both of those programs in one-stop centers, so that we would work together in the same location. In addition to working together in the same location, we designed a program based around the notion of common customer model, meaning instead of just two programs housed under one roof, we really organized our staff and our services around the customer. So we became a seamless team between the employment department and the WIA providers that worked around the customers instead of two programs that the customers would have to navigate. So the notion of common customer model has been really useful to us in expanding our partnerships, and I'll touch on that, how that relates to our partnerships with housing and continuum of care further on in the presentation. In terms of integrated service delivery, the change really prioritized an open-door, high-volume, high-quality model of services. And so, as you recall, 2008 was really the onset of the recession. Prior to this change, we served around 3,000 people in the Portland metro area a year, and that shot up to about 80,000 people in that same period. So, you know, we're currently hovering around the 100,000 mark in terms of people using one-stop services in the Portland area. I got to say, one of the real benefits of that was that in the context of a huge community problem like the recession and the amount of people needing retraining and jobs, a program that serves 3,000 people is just, it's a boutique program, doesn't have the relevance. So it was a good timing for the change, although, you know, having that kind of pressure is, when you're doing deep systems change, it can make things more challenging. But we were able to respond to the community in a way that was right-sized to the problem of the recession. And, you know, I say this because when you have a system that serves, the reason we have a system that serves 80,000 people is because we have just an open door. There isn't screening process. We don't want you to go through core intensive training. We want you to come in and provide the services that are right for you. And if that's, you know, a couple of workshops, that's great. If you need retraining that lasts a year, that's great too. And so there's a priority on just getting people in and serving them without the kind of hoops that are often part of the historical WIA screening process. And the way we were able to serve more people also is to convert into a sort of menu of services format rather than a case management format. So most WIA programs had case managers that would carry a caseload, maybe 40, 50 people, and they would develop a service plan and navigate them through services. And we removed case management. We redirected those resources into providing preparatory training and employment services. So, you know, stuff like vocational English as a second language courses, social media courses, training in healthcare occupations, all of those kind of services is where we placed our resources and moved away from case management, which is in a mainstream historical WIA program, that's the highest item of cost. So that was what allowed us to serve so many more people, including working with another major partner, which is employment department. Along with that change in the format of services to being just sort of open menu, you know, one of the challenges that we found was that often for barriered populations, they need long-term relationship-based coaching and support to be successful. It might be harder for a person who has multiple barriers to success to go in and say, here's what I need to be successful, and to self-navigate those services. So, you know, one way we could have looked at that was, oh, well, this system serves a lot of people, but it's just not that good at serving people that need one-on-one long-term coaching and support. But another way of looking at it, and that's, I'll touch back on the common customer model, is that we don't feel that one program has to provide all the services in order to make the service mix for serving a population. We weren't doing it in our one-stop centers. It was, you know, we had WIA providers, we had employment department wrapping themselves around the customer, and we saw ourselves as a team serving the customer. So it meant for us, we need to partner to develop a solution rather than think of it as an absent service in our system. So, you know, we took that notion of common customer model and working as a team, interagency team, interorganizational team around the customer, and we reached out to community-based organizations, a lot of community care organizations, to partner to work together where they share the common interests of helping their residents or the people that they serve become self-sufficient through employment. And, you know, as Pat said in her introduction, how employment is really one of the areas of focus that's important in the housing world. So within the housing context, we found partners, and I'll talk about a couple of the early pilot partners, who shared that interest in helping job seekers become self-sufficient through employment, and who had the staff who knew the populations, were working with the populations already, and could work with us to help move their job seekers into training and employment activities. Generally speaking, the way the partnership worked is that the one-stop system provides the preparatory training and employment services, and the career coaches, the folks with the relationships with the job seekers who come from homeless and housing partners, provide the career coaching, the long-term relationships, the development of a career plan, and navigation through the employment services offered through WorkSource. We call those roles career coaches, and we use a process of career planning called career mapping that was developed maybe a decade ago through a pilot Department of Labor grant. It was actually a model that was designed to help improve access of people with disabilities to one-stop services, but we found that it helped broadly in terms of serving varied populations. And another aspect of having that career mapping process is that we're really working in partnership with agencies that are principally focused on issues like housing or, you know, social services, even domestic violence. We work with different kinds of partners, and so having a highly structured way of helping their staff become career coaches and move their clients into employment goals and services that's something that structure is really helpful with in terms of that kind of culture change and system change. Here's kind of an illustration of how that works. And so the career coach would be a continuum of care staff person. This might be a housing authority case manager, for example. And so we teach them, we train them in career mapping, which is a model of career planning, developing an action plan and following it through until you reach your career goal. And the people that we'd serve are people within the partner organization who want to reach self-sufficiency through employment. And we share that goal with our partners in housing. And so we provide the worksource services, and there's a whole menu. As I mentioned, we redirected our resources into sort of open menu of services. So things like English as a second language training, computer literacy, job readiness, resume, interview, all of those things, social media, all of those things that you would think of that would be typically available through a one-stop center. And then we also develop some specialized services to support these relationships specifically. So we found that there are some services that would be even more beneficial. There were target placement services for people with criminal records, for example. The Rolodex and group of employers that you work with, it can be fairly specific when you're placing people who have felony background. And so that's an example. We develop an internship program for paid internships for 3 months. And a lot of people that we served in these partnerships hadn't worked before or hadn't worked in a decade or more, and really benefited from being in an environment where they could get back to work, get some supervisory experience, learn on the job, and in some cases even be hired by the work site where we placed them at. So we didn't have a subsidized internship program for adults before that, but we developed one because it was a valuable tool. We also organized trainings, cohort trainings, or set aside scholarships for trainings for our partners because when we're working with them over time, we want to make sure that the services are in place. As they're putting the investment of their staff time, their customers into going through these services to reach a career plan, we want to make sure that the training resources, internship resources, and so forth are available for them as they navigate their customers through to reach their career goals. So in terms of the initial pilots that I wanted to mention, the first, and this is again maybe 2009, was with Multnomah County. That's one of the 2 counties that we serve in Portland metro area. And so at the time there was an influx of stimulus package funding. We received some, and the county did also, and they approached us and said, hey, let's do something together that focuses on employment. Interesting timing with jobs, job loss and, happening at the levels it was during that period, but good because it gives people time to go into training and really focus on improving their skills when the economy is taking a downturn too. So the conversation was, let's do something that really pulls what you do, which is household, family stabilization with the focus of that program, anti-poverty. And we were doing employment and training services, and we connected the two. So they worked with a continuum of community-based providers, including, I'd say, mostly continuum of care providers. You can see the names of the providers here on this slide. We provided the preparatory training and employment services through WorkSource. So what we did is develop an environment where the county providers did the career coaching and case management, and were trained in WorkSource services, and we developed and provided those services to the job seekers through the WorkSource system. In that initial pilot, there were 281 participants served, 129, and I think, I didn't calculate that out, but I think it looks like maybe 40 or so percent, 45% maybe, of the people actually completed occupational training. So that was really high. A lot of people, as you know, in deep poverty are desperate for employment first. So sometimes having people go through training is a challenge because of the pressure to bring in income. We're really glad to see that level of training because it means higher wages. 53 completed the subsidized internships, that's where we put them at an employer in the area of their career interest and paid their wages so they can have that experience and in some cases be hired. And 61% were employed at the point of exit from the pilot. The other pilot was with Home Forward, which Home Forward is our local housing authority, and they received a grant through the Paul Allen Family Foundation, and they approached us and said, hey, let's do something together. So it was a lot like the initial pilot with the county, where there was a little seed money that encouraged us to work together in ways that were different. And so we implemented this in the same model of their staff providing career coaching for public housing residents that wanted to engage in employment and training activities, and us providing the training employment services through the one-stop system. Home Forward is designated as a moving to work program through HUD, meaning that they have some special ability to provide employment services. So they had staff called moving to work staff. They call them goals program staff locally, but who work with their residents on employment services. So it's those staff that were serving as the career coaches that we trained in the services available through WorkSource. So we trained in the career mapping process that we gave access to the target resources in WorkSource, and they worked with a group of 33 housing residents in the pilot. It was about a year-long pilot. 19 of those, so almost two-thirds, completed occupational training. The focus of training was in healthcare and clerical office occupations. 13 did subsidized internships, and again, we developed the work experience program for adults to support these relationships specifically. We didn't have them before, but we could see that they were really important to have that kind of service in place to serve this population successfully, because many hadn't had recent work experience. So there's a variety of additional services that we've built out to support our partnerships and the populations they serve. 22 were employed, so about two-thirds employed with an average. The measures are a little different than we use typically because of the way the Paul Allen grant was, but and the way they measured it, housing authorities. But the annual household income increased by 112%. So it was around a little under 15, I think, for average household income, and it raised to close to 30,000. 4 of the housing residents moved into employment and ended housing subsidies altogether. So to Pat's point, it's a really important linkage between employment and housing, because it's important, in terms of the aspirations and interests of the residents for their own lives, but also in order to free up space when that's possible for other folks that can benefit from housing support. Another major area, and again, just to kind of recontext this a bit, this is iterative, this is building programs and relationships and initiatives over time. All of these things we've sustained in one way or another, but this is maybe three years after the initial pilots that I mentioned. The Portland Housing Bureau funds what's called an Economic Opportunity Program, and we reorganized this program to create systemic ties between the one-stop system and the network of community-based providers that serve the populations, provide the outreach, and provide the employment services. So the program is funded through CDBG and City of Portland general funds. Work Systems also contributes to the funding for this program. There are 8 community-based providers, including continuum of care providers. They're all community-based organizations. Many are focused on serving homeless populations. The program altogether serves about 700 participants on an ongoing basis. I think the average duration is a little over a year in terms of how long people are in services. The program has a population focus on people in public housing or homeless, ex-offenders, and immigrants. And there's strong overlaps there, in particular between folks that are ex-offenders and homeless or in public housing. The program links the culturally specific and population-specific providers. And what I mean by population-specific is maybe they focus on reentry and serving people who have prior criminal records. And it ties those to services available through the one-stop system. So all of those organizations have career coaches, they're trained in career mapping, and we put the services offered through the one-stop system, the menu of services, into their hands like a toolbox that they can use to help their clients get where they need to go. The program demographics overall is 53% male, 47% female, 55% are people of color, 88% are below 30% of median family income. And you know, it's on an ongoing basis, 71% of people who exit the program exit employed with an average wage of $13 an hour. Just a few more offshoots since that program. So in the last few years, Work Systems received from Department of Labor with Grant Workforce Incentive Fund, Innovation Fund, for what we call locally Housing Works. And it was replicating the Paul Allen pilot I mentioned earlier on a larger scale, including 3 workforce areas and 4 housing authorities around the Portland metro area. So it's a 3-year, $5 million grant, and we're just wrapping up now. So it's really been a build-out of the relationship between housing and workforce there. As we come into our final year here, the folks enrolled in this program year, it's about 60% are entering employment at the point of program exit. We also have a grant recently awarded from Department of Health and Human Services called Healthcare, we use a local name, Health Career, I'll just use the local name. There is a federal name for this grant, but we call it Health Careers Northwest, and it's a $12 million grant to serve low-income job seekers, and this is folks on food stamps, TANF, with training and placement in healthcare occupations. And we work with a lot of those same partners in continuum of care. Housing Authority of Washington County, Community Action, Central City Concern, which is a major homeless provider in the region, Human Solutions, a major housing provider, and International Refugee Community Organization. So this will serve 1,350 people over the 5-year duration of the grant, with a very strong focus and linkage to folks in continuum of care programs. And then the last thing is that we have launched a satellite of one of our one-stop centers. So Central City Concern is a downtown, Old Town Chinatown located homeless service organization, and they partner with us on a lot of the fronts, including some of the grants and programs I've talked about. And we're stationing a satellite of the one-stop center in Central City Concern to provide more convenient access for some of the services. We just had a sort of ribbon cutting last week, and so that'll be a more convenient site for people to access one-stop services, and both from Central City Concern and other homeless serving partners in the downtown area. We're projecting that site will serve between 2,000 and 4,000 people a year. So those are the kind of projects that we have going on now. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Chang from Portland Housing Bureau, and she'll talk about the perspective from Housing Bureau perspective.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer. As Patrick mentioned, I'm the COC coordinator for the Portland region, which is comprised of 3 jurisdictions, the cities of Portland and Gresham, and then also Multnomah County. Patrick discussed some of the effective programs that we've built in our community, and I'm going to cover some more recent efforts we've taken over the past 2 years that's moving us from program-level partnerships to more system-level collaborative planning. However, first I'd like to give a brief background on our COC itself and how it's governed, which provides some helpful context in terms of how we're working on improving our community. So our COC brings in approximately $15.3 million annually, and this is based on the last fiscal year. It supports 44 different projects that serve families, adults, and youth experiencing homelessness. the COC funding to our community is essential to our ending homelessness efforts. It accounts for approximately a quarter of our community's focused investment on ending homelessness programming. And the vast majority of our COC funds are focused on permanent housing. So 83% of our COC projects are permanent housing programs. And we definitely use our COC funding to leverage resources from other systems, including employment, health, and affordable housing. And one great example that was in our community had back in 2003 was when our COC was awarded a multi-year grant through a DOL HUD initiative that focused on ending chronic homelessness through employment and housing. So these funds were available for multiple years. I think the grant ran from 2003 to 2009 or so, and it helped us to jumpstart several really effective strategies that support chronically homeless individuals and families, which included forming assertive community treatment teams, or ACT teams, and individualized placement and supportive employment programming. So over the years, our COC has used these strategies and built upon them to better integrate them into our homeless services. So our COC is really based on a planning document or framework called A Home for Everyone. And this was formed in 2014, which has a vision to ensure that everyone should have a safe and stable place to call home. The plan was essentially a refresh of our previous 10-year plan to end homelessness, which had originally formed in 2004. And so as you see on the slide here is our vision. It has some guiding values, and I just want to focus on some of the key focus areas that the plan targets, which are the second one and number 6, which are income and benefits and systems coordination, which have been very intentional areas for our community that we've identified as needing to focus investment and effort to achieve the goal to really end homelessness in our community. So our COC board is called the Home for Everyone Board. It was also established in 2014 and serves as our COC governing board. It meets monthly, and it's comprised of an executive committee, which is the top bar that you see on this slide. This is a group of about 7 or 8 individuals who are the local jurisdictions or elected officials. It also includes our housing authority and representatives from philanthropy, business, and faith communities. And then the executive committee is a subset or a part of the broader coordinating board, which is our much larger, broader-based community board, which has a total of 28 members who are appointed by the executive committee members and include community members with lived experience of homelessness, our employment providers and partners, health, domestic violence, education, and many other partners. And over the last couple of years of our board operating, we have found an effective way to move forward work and policy and planning has been through forming subgroups or subcommittees that are focused on certain topics or population focuses that then report back to the coordinating board membership and around specific work. So one example is we have data and evaluation subcommittee. We also have a community forum that's comprised mainly of consumers or individuals with lived experience of homelessness and direct agency staff. And then a year ago, our executive committee charged the formation of 5 specific work groups focusing on developing action plans in 5 areas, one of them including employment. So strengthening our COC's partnership with required intention, as both Mike, Pat, and Patrick have mentioned before. You know, the collaboration in Portland didn't just happen overnight or by itself, but required relationship building over time. And the motivation to do so is really based on the understanding that people's service needs are varied and they're often complex, and they're not isolated to a single service or a system. So building better collaboration across systems will result in more benefits to the individual systems of service delivery, but more importantly, or equally importantly, help to improve the outcomes for people being served in our community. And so I just want to highlight 3 steps that our COC took, and then I'll say a few words about each of them. One is we invited representation and participation of the WIB on our COC board. Second is we partnered, COC partners worked together with the WIB to co-facilitate and develop an action plan that was focused on improving housing and employment alignment. And then third, we've collaborated both in the past, but continue to on opportunities to secure new funding and resources. So with the first item, just intentionally inviting representation of our WIB occurred in a few ways. We wanted to ensure as a COC that we had the WIB at the table, at the COC planning table. And so even before we developed our COC board, several of the staff, COC staff who were working on developing the COC board and designing it reached out to Patrick and other colleagues at Work Systems to learn about how our local WIB governing structure was formed. And there were several really important elements of that local WIB board that we actually used to base and design our current COC board on. So also, the COC invited the executive director of our WIB to be an appointed and voting member of the COC board. And then as we've been moving forward on different work and planning with the creation of the work group around employment and housing, our WIB leadership have been at the table to co-lead and co-facilitate that process to do collaborative planning. And so talking more specifically about the work of this work group is it had a charge to develop an action plan with a very aggressively condensed timeline of within 3 months to look at how we as a community, if we had additional resources or when we identify additional resources, what could we do immediately and effectively to make big impacts in outcomes for people experiencing homelessness around employment and housing. And so we formed this work group based with that goal, and we're able to, through the 3-month process, convene a broader network of about 25 or 28 employment and housing and governmental partners and consumers to meet on a regular basis. And through that process, several valuable things occurred. So one was that the group was able to articulate and communicate back to the COC board the importance and community priority of using employment and access to economic opportunity as a key strategy or key strategies to prevent and end homelessness. And then we were able to also focus our efforts on looking first at aligning the resources we currently have in our community. So we developed this phrase around bringing workforce to housing and bring housing to workforce. So the diagram you see on the slide there, it's overly simplified, but it's to communicate the point that systems themselves are serving individuals that are accessing services in both, and that we can better integrate the services provided by housing and homeless providers as well as workforce and employment providers to create efficiencies, effectiveness, and better outcomes for people that are common customers. So this is just an example of some of the agency partners that were part of the work group. It included our state partners, Department of Human Services, as well as local governmental representatives and several community-based and culturally specific agencies. So at the conclusion of our planning work, we were able to develop 6 key investment priorities. So I won't go through all of them here. You'll have the slides and can look at these later. But these investment priorities are both included recommendations to expand the capacity of existing effective programs and networks, such as the Economic Opportunity Program that we highlighted earlier. And it also proposes funding for new initiatives aimed at responding to current needs or opportunities and also disparities within our community. Just one that I would highlight, the third one down, housing and workforce alignment for TANF families, is a recommendation that came up to connect our state-funded self-sufficiency programs with our local WIB resources and community-based housing support to really provide that wraparound employment and housing and community-based support for a cohort of families receiving TANF who were experiencing homelessness or just imminently about to lose their housing. So due to the collaborative planning we took, our COC was and has been better positioned to have some strategies on hand when new resources and opportunities become available. And fortunately, we've had some opportunities over the last year, and we've been able to benefit from using the collaborative planning we've done to be able to support some of the efforts identified. One is that we were able to, through partnership with our housing authority, they were able to direct some funds for rent assistance and housing assistance directly connected to some of our employment networks, which had been identified as a need because people were engaged and going through several of our employment programs and services, but during that process becoming at risk of losing their housing or maybe even were homeless at the start. So this rent assistance has played a really key role in providing the housing and stability for people to successfully continue through and complete employment or career training. And then also we've, through our WIB and COC partners, worked together to apply for a grant through one of our local foundations that was doing an effort around increasing alignment to housing, and one of their key areas of system alignment was employment. And so we were able to secure and be awarded a smaller grant that will pay for some staffing capacity to look at how to better align programmatic employment and housing efforts, and also look at some of the resources in our community and available at the state and federal level where we could better integrate or tap into other opportunities. And then finally, in late last year, the mayor of Portland declared a state of housing emergency in Portland. And so together with our county leadership and leadership from our Home for Everyone, or COC board, the city and the county committed to additional new local funding to address and end homelessness for the upcoming year. And so because of this commitment and then the commitment of new funding, we now have some priorities that are specifically speaking to the employment and housing connection that will definitely be considered in the decisions around where these new funds get allocated. So there's some great things happening in our community. We're experiencing increased momentum to move forward to create better alignment with the employment and housing systems. However, we definitely still have untapped opportunities or challenges that still stand in the way of us making progress or making progress as quickly as we would like to. One is around better coordination of the local WIOA planning efforts and policy with our COC board, directly with our COC board and COC-funded programs. We also, through just many conversations, both through our COC as well as, just over the past years, have a need to really identify and support more strategies that engage employers and also bring income and employment opportunities to homeless individuals outside of or in coordination with the public workforce system. So these are, include things such as earned income opportunities and social enterprises. And so we're really interested in wanting to explore how to expand resources in this area and bring that more programming to there. And then also continued need for advocacy and communication with our federal partners to improve the coordination with DOL, HHS, HUD, and just some examples to work together and to have better coordination around the outcome-focused measures for such programs as TANF and WIOA that really promote the long-term employment and housing stability goals that we all want to see the families and individuals in our community achieve. And so, there's more to come, and I think at this time I will turn it back to Pat to field some questions.
All right, everybody. Well, the questions have been coming in hot and heavy, so let's jump into questions. We have a question for Mike, but I think we're going to ask Mike to give a short answer, and then I would like to hear Patrick and Jennifer's take on it. The question is, we have connected to the workforce board. Some get back to us, some don't even get back to us. The ones who do get back to us, they pretty much refer us to their contracted agency and don't feel they can help homeless people, especially those who have high barriers. Has that been an issue for you guys, or is that something that you've had to deal with?
It has not been an issue for us because, as Patrick said a little earlier, Houston and Portland are very much alike in this respect. On the workforce side, we see a customer as a customer as a customer. It really doesn't matter who you are. If you come to us for our service, we're going to try to find a way to do what we can for you.
Patrick and Jennifer, anything different?
I'm sure that's a thing that issues region by region, and they're over the arc of a long period of time, I think there's been a steady improvement. I mean, if you rewound a decade, I think you'd see that feeling, and it's just that's part of the building process too, is just improving those relationships, and it's something that you need to be really deliberate about. We don't experience that now, but I think it was a factor in our community in the past.
One of the things that I'll just jump in there and say is that one of the things I learned the hard way was sometimes the phone is not always the best way to start a relationship. I try to set up meetings and go in and sit down and talk with people face to face, because I think that goes a lot longer and a lot further than making a phone call and hoping they'll call you back.
Yeah. I mean, I would say also that I think it occurs on multiple levels. One area, I think, our community has had programs and partnerships that have kind of built and, developed kind of increased trust and kind of where people are seeing the mutual benefits, so we've had that time to be able to see the programs and the partnerships and say, hey, wait, this actually really benefits, multiple parties, and that's why we should continue doing this. And, as a funder, with the city, I think that's also one way in which you can think about, really creating those partnerships through funding, which brings people to the table in a different way than trying to make, the one-on-one connections. But one area that I think we still need work on is, just looking at the, the staff level, the direct staff level individuals. I think there's still a lot of differences in terms of how the different systems kind of view and maybe the service delivery model. And I think that has definitely, we've been able to work on that through some of these partnerships, but just still being able to do some cross-training or opportunities for housing providers to meet employment providers and kind of understand how the system works and vice versa is kind of a more organic way to kind of build those connections.
Thank you. Another question is, how long are the training programs? How did you work with the coordinated intake systems? And the reason they're asking is because their rapid rehousing program in the county is 4 months, so the families need to be self-sufficient in a short period of time.
Sure. So, Jennifer, I'm going to divide and conquer, and I'll take the part about the training. The program model, one of the changes in it from the program I called Economic Opportunity, which is probably the largest piece of the different partnerships, we changed it from a specific amount of time in program services to really just be focused on what the customer needs. So the service duration starts with the customer's goals, and if they want to be a pharmacy tech, it just really depends on where they're at the time. So we have people that just come in and they want a job, and the service duration could be 3 months in that situation or less, or just a referral. But on the other hand, if they want to go through training, those trainings can last a quarter to, over a year. So, the answer there is it really depends on the customer's, job seeker's interests and needs in terms of reaching their career goal.
Yeah, in terms of the coordinated entry part of that question, our community currently has some coordinated entry processes in place, but not one that's across all populations and services. It's something we're definitely now and continuing to develop. And so I think now as we look to broaden coordinated entry and as a system and across populations for COC-funded projects, we definitely will now we have our workforce partners at the table to determine how best to use them as an access point into coordinated entry, ideally. But I think we're working on that, and still will need to develop that.
Okay. Another question. Did the work group bring in the child care system / voucher system into the fold with the Strong County government? And why is with the Strong County government, there seems to be this kind of siloed thinking and lack of collaboration with job and family services. Any thoughts about the child care system, voucher system? That could be either Patrick and Jennifer or Mike.
This is Mike. We already have the child care funds in the workforce system. So, again, I'm sounding like a broken record here, but as Patrick said, it all depends on the customer. So if we're working with a customer through either in one of our offices or through the coordinated access points, or any way we touch a customer, if it's an individual experiencing homelessness and they express to us a need for help with child care expenses, then we see how we can do that using the funds and the resources we have.
Yeah, it's not, in the Portland area, it's a need, of course, but it's not as well connected. I mean, we see that as one of the legs of the stool that's really critical, especially when you start to talk about TANF and barrier populations, and has been a challenge in terms of getting people into, through training programs into employment. We had an environment where people were sleeping in cars in truck stops while they're going through training, and as Jennifer mentioned, we tied housing to that to make it more successful, reach better outcomes, and move people through services faster and free up more housing opportunities. But we don't have that level of system alignment around the child care.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm going to ask the operator to open up the floor to see if there are any more questions before I keep asking questions, to give people a chance to ask their questions.
As a reminder, if you would like to participate in the interactive question and answer session, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a tone acknowledging your request and a prompt to record your name. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. And there are no questions at this.
There are no questions. Okay. I know I had some more questions. Let me. I'm going through my notes that I've been writing down. All right. One of the questions. So how long did it take to get this process, or get to this point? Like how long have you been working in this system to get to this point, where you feel like you have some decent collaboration going on?
I would say from the Portland standpoint, and Jennifer will chime in, that it's really been about 8 years. I mean, the starting point from our perspective was the reorganization of the one-stop system. So that really created the framework and opportunity for us to partner more. And, it took 3 or 4 years to get to any scale. But it feels like now, we've really got solid connections in place, and, we're just growing what we see as a really strong partnership at this point.
Okay.
We did have a question come in over the phone, if you would like to accept that. It's from Dolores Hiller. Go ahead with your question.
Oh, good afternoon. I basically wanted to know, how will new organizations be able to partner with this program in order to integrate it in our housing program?
Which program are you referring to?
The WIOA program. The WIOA program.
The WIOA?
Yeah, the WIOA.
So can you repeat the question? It was hard. I had a hard time hearing the question.
How would new organizations, housing organizations, be able to partner with the program in order to integrate it into their housing program?
So the housing people want to know how would they get a seat at the table?
Correct.
Any thoughts about that from Mike or Patrick or Jennifer?
This is Mike. I will say where we are presently in Houston, the relationship is through the Coalition for the Homeless. So it's kind of happening through that continuum of care process. So new entrants kind of come in that way.
Yeah, I would agree that we have our continuum of care board called A Home for Everyone, and participation in that board, or I believe that, as well as reaching out to your local workforce investment board partner, could be ways that new agencies would get involved, depending on how both of those are set up in your community, or if you have, each of those in your community.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more telephone questions?
There is another question. The line was inaudible, but caller, go ahead with your question. May I go ahead with your question, caller? And there are no further questions.
Okay. Well, let me thank all of our speakers. Let me thank Kevin, Mike, Patrick, Jennifer. This has been, I don't know about anybody else, but this has been great. It's great hearing about the programs. It's great hearing what's going on. And the information about the presenters and their contact information is on the slide. But it's helpful to know that with all the work you're doing, that you're starting to see some of the results of it. So thank you for sharing that with us. I wanted to remind people that we have another webinar coming up. Our next webinar is going to be about Housing and Employment Works, Employment Assessment and Coordinated Entry Systems on Thursday, June 16th at 1 Eastern. Would love to have all of you there. And I wanted to just finish up by asking Kevin if he wanted to close us out.
Hi, everyone. This is Kevin Kissinger from HUD. I wasn't able to join earlier. I just want to echo what Pat said and thank all of our panelists. This is really an exciting new ground for most of us who are used to working with the homeless organizations that serve the homeless, and I'd say also for local workforce investment boards. For many of them, this is also new territory. So on behalf of the U.S. Interagency Council on the Homeless, the Department of Labor, and the Department of HUD, thank you, everyone, for participating.
And thank you for participating, and have a great day.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect. Presenters, please hold for the post-conference.